that is India and Japan. I had requested them to cancel the class today or arrange for an alternate teacher. They could not do it. Still not well. We'll again leave it a little early today. I'll take again the next class with you again next week, and again next class when I take next week, we'll again do it for 1 hour to compensate for today's class. So maybe next time when we meet again for 1 hour, we'll cover this, and then we'll proceed to the next topic after that. So when it comes to India and Japan, let us first understand at the systemic level that how India and Japan are today coming closer. So as far as India and Japan relations are concerned, if we look at the systemic level, that is the role of the international system and how does it impact the state behavior. By undertaking that study here, first let us quickly have an overview of how the relation with Japan actually. Things will become more clear to you because of that. So during the Cold War period, India, as we know, was a non-aligned country. Japan, on the other hand, became an ally of US. After the end of the World War II, specifically at that time when the Japanese were basically devastated by the American bombing attack, it is surprising that during the Cold War, America and Japan became allies. 1950, Treaty of San Francisco. The Treaty of San Francisco between the US and Japan in 1950 made the two countries allies of each other. And if India was a non-aligned country while Japan was basically an ally of US, both the countries were ideologically different. And despite this ideologically different from each other, it is in the year of 1950 itself that India and Japan basically signed a treaty of friendship. A treaty of friendship is an important treaty because this treaty opened up a diplomatic relation between the two states. So normally, after independence, whenever you sign treaty of friendships, they are basically for opening up of the diplomatic ties. That is the thing that happened between India and Japan. But please remember very carefully that even though India and Japan were ideologically different, diplomatically they still decided to engage with each other. Similarly, during the Cold War period again, India provided to Japan iron ore, and this iron ore that we gave to them was basically for their economic rebuilding. So Japan and India during the Cold War engaged at this level that India provided Japan with iron ore. We gave them a few kgs of rusted iron ore. They used it for their economic rebuilding. On the other hand, Japan during the Cold War period provided India with something called economic aid. The economic aid that Japan provides is called ODA. ODA stands for Official Development Assistance. So please write down the full form. ODA stands for Official Development Assistance. So Official Development Assistance, or the ODA, is basically a name of the economic aid that Japan provides to India. They provide to other countries also. There is another country in the world that also uses the same term ODA, that is Canada. So Canada also calls their economic aid ODA, so don't be surprised if Canada also uses the same term. Similarly, during the Cold War period, in the 1980s, the two countries, India and Japan, opened up cooperation in the sector of manufacturing. So in 1980s, manufacturing now became a new area of cooperation between India and Japan, and in the 1990s, when India became an open economy, at that time when India became an open economy, India began to undertake trade with Japan as such. And now one reason why trade was easily possible with Japan is that because India became an open economy, Japan being an ally of US was always an open economy. Similarly, it is in the year 2000, the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiro Modi visited India, and when he visited India in the year 2000, Minister Yoshihiro Modi. He made a very important announcement in India. And the announcement that he made was that in future, India and Japan will become strategic partners. So this was a very crucial announcement made by the Japanese Prime Minister on the soil of India, that in the future India and Japan will become strategic partners. Now whether India and Japan have today become strategic partners or not, we can see that from the levels of analysis approach that we have discussed earlier. So we can apply the levels of analysis now, and we will first look at the systemic level, which is very important. Systemic level also is the level 2. So in order to understand the systemic interaction, it is very important to understand this phenomena today called the rise of China. So understand this very carefully. It's slightly complex and a lot of fundamentals are involved here. As far as China is concerned and its rise is concerned, the story can basically be traced back to 1978. That is the time period when China made a transition towards an open economy. We know one thing, that when China was born, that is in 1949, China at that time we know was a communist country. But China in 1978 also we know made a transition towards an open economy, made a transition towards what is called as capitalism. Whenever a country transitions from communism to capitalism, and whenever a country makes this transition, it requires to create institutions and regulators to run the capitalist economy. So this is an important thing to remember, that whenever a country which is communist transitions towards capitalism, that country has to create a set of institutions and regulators for the purpose of enabling their economy to run on capitalism. That means that if you are a capitalist country or you want to be a capitalist country, you should have certain institutions and regulators in place. These institutions and regulators are basically called as an architecture for capitalism. Every country has to do that. India also did that when we became an open economy in the 1990s. We created multiple institutions, multiple regulators for the architecture for capitalism. China did the same. By 1985, these institutions and regulators were finally created by China. So China by 1985 was able to create these institutions and regulators. And once these institutions and regulators were created, China was able to undertake open economic growth. So once these institutions and regulators were put in place, China was now successfully able to undertake what is called as an open economic growth. Though China became capitalist in 1978, but Chinese economic growth began only by 1985. And as it began by 1985, China now needed resources. As China now needed resources, China in 1985 announced a strategy. The strategy that they announced is called outward strategy. So in 1985, China needed resources. They announced a strategy called the outward strategy. The outward strategy was a very simple strategy where China said that if I need resource, and if I need that resource for my economic growth, then what I will do is, I will get these resources from countries which are outside China. This is a very conscious decision made by the Chinese. The decision that they said that if we need resource, we will not use our domestic resource, but we will get the resource from countries which are outside China. China said we will save our domestic resource for the time being. We will use our domestic resource maybe sometime in the future, and we will prefer to buy this resource from countries which are outside China. The first area that China prioritized was the area called Southeast Asia. So China said we will basically get these resources from the countries of Southeast Asia. Now the first question that arises is that why did China prioritize Southeast Asia? So there are various reasons here. First and foremost reason is that it is in the geographical proximity. Southeast Asian countries are geographically proximate to China. Not only that, but Southeast Asian countries are also very resource rich. also, if you remember, we have seen just earlier that in 1967, Southeast Asian countries created ASEAN. ASEAN was a grouping of open economies. China now became an open economy. So when China became an open economy, ASEAN was a group of open economies in Southeast Asia. In front of them, China decided to integrate with Southeast Asia. So these three factors enabled the Chinese, as part of their outward strategy, to get the resource from Southeast Asian countries. China started getting this resource. China started using the resource to increase its economic power. So China started getting this resource. China started using the resource of the Southeast Asian countries to basically increase its economic power. As the Chinese economic power was rising and started rising because of the resources they began to get from here, 4 years down the line, 1989 to 91, Cold War ended. When the Cold War ended, at that time, China perceived the ending of the Cold War very positively. China was one of the countries which was relatively happier with the ending of the Cold War, because China said that as the Cold War has ended, the world will basically restructure, which is the truth. China said if the Cold War has ended, it means that the world will restructure. And China said if the world will restructure means that we will get more access to resources easily now. So China now was very clear that as the world will restructure, we will get more access to resource. And if we will get more access to resource at the end of the Cold War, now China, as part of their outward strategy again, prioritized yet another area for resource, and now this area for resource at the end of the Cold War was Central Asia. So China now picks up the area of Central Asia. China says that in this area of Central Asia, we will be able to get the resource from here. Now, let us first try to understand that firstly, why did China prioritize Central Asia here? So as far as why China prioritized Central Asia here as a part of their outward strategy at the end of the Cold War is not very difficult to understand. First and foremost reason remains the same. It's a geographically proximate area to China. And second reason also remains the same, that Central Asian countries are also resource rich. So China was smart enough to understand from where to get the resource. Central Asia was yet another territory. But third important factor here is that Central Asia during Cold War was basically part of USSR. During the Cold War period, Central Asian countries were part of the Soviet Union. In 1917, Russian Revolution had happened. In 1920, Central Asian countries officially became a part of USSR. Since 1920 till now, Central Asian countries were part of the Soviet Union. But now what happened is that at the end of the Cold War, 5 Central Asian republics are independent. Central Asia always had 5 countries, but those 5 countries during Cold War were part of USSR. During the Cold War, USSR was made up of Russia plus 15 other states. So Russia plus 15 other states included 5 states of Central Asia also. But now at the end of the Cold War, what has happened is that those 5 states of Central Asia have now become Central Asian republics. And these Central Asian republics are now finally independent from Russia. So China thought that these are new independent republics in my neighborhood, which are not only geographically proximate but also resource rich. So therefore China prioritized in this context to take the resource from these Central Asian republics. But when China prioritized Central Asia here, China also realized that we have some limitations in Central Asia. What are the limitations China found out? Number one, China said the first limitation is lack of policy clarity of Central Asia. Firstly, China said there is a problem we have, and that problem is lack of policy clarity of Central Asia. What does this mean? China said that these Central Asian countries have just now become independent. Now, will these countries become pro-Russia? We do not know. Will these countries become pro-US? We do not know. Will these countries now remain neutral? We do not know. Central Asian countries during the Cold War are part of Russia. Central Asian countries at the end of the Cold War have become independent from Russia. As they have become independent, there is a high possibility Central Asian countries can still remain pro-Russia in the post-Cold War period. There is a high possibility they may become pro-US also. At the end of the Cold War, when Russia disintegrated, at that time, USA became the sole superpower. And US became the unipolar power in the world. So China thought that there is a possibility that at a time when the US is the sole superpower, these Central Asian countries can become pro-US also. We do not know. Or they can also remain neutral. That also remains a possibility. So what policy will these Central Asian will follow in the future is something that we do not know. Was the first limitation for China in Central Asia. Second limitation was China said that we also have some border disputes pending in Central Asia. After all, they were neighbors. China said we also have some border issues pending with them. We have some border disputes pending with them. So with these two limitations, and specifically with the second limitation, that presence of border disputes, China said if I have border disputes with them and if I need their resource, why will they give me their resource? Till the time I have border dispute with them. So these were two limitations China knew very clearly, that they will basically prevent us to reach out to Central Asia. So China therefore in this backdrop adopted a strategy. The strategy that they adopted was basically number one. China adopted the policy called wait and watch policy. The wait and watch policy was for the point number one here. That China said that, see, I do not know what policy they will adopt in the future. Let me for the time being wait and watch how the time unfolds in Central Asia. Over a period of time, I will develop policy clarity that what kind of policy Central Asia will follow. But China said very clearly that if I have to wait and watch, I will not waste my time here. If I have to wait and watch their policy as to how they will behave, whether they will become pro-US, pro-Russia or neutral, till that time, what I will also do is, I will try to solve the border problem. So China was smart enough again to understand that we will not waste our time. We will solve the border problem. To do that, in 1996, China created a grouping called Shanghai Five. Shanghai Five is a grouping created by China in 1996. Shanghai Five brought together Central Asian countries and China. These countries came together to solve the border problem. When these countries came together to solve the border problem in Shanghai Five, it is important to remember that China adopted a very, very accommodative attitude. This is a very crucial point to understand about the Chinese behavior. That China adopted a very accommodative attitude. Accommodative attitude means that China said that, see, I have to solve the border problem with them. There are some areas at the border which I claim. There are some areas at the border that the Central Asians claim. I have to be accommodative. China said I cannot be rigid. China said that if required ever during the discussions with these people here, if ever required that I have to give away a part of my territory to them, I will give away my territory to them. This is a very important thing said by China. Because not only China for that matter, no country will ever do that. No country will ever try to give away a part of their sovereign territory to another state. But China said, I will not be rigid. I know Central Asian countries are nothing in front of me. But if required to solve the border problem, if they want a part of my territory which is disputed, I will happily give away to them that territory. But provided giving away that territory helps me to solve the border problem. So first question that arises here is that what motivated China to be so altruistic? What motivated China to be so accommodative is basically at the back of the mind resource. Because China knew that by being accommodative, this area will become my own backyard. By being accommodative, I will get the tremendous access of resource from this area, which will help me to increase my economic power. So China, with this attitude in mind, accommodative attitude in mind, was able to solve the border problem by 2001. So by 2001, the border issue is solved. Central Asians are very happy, the Chinese are very happy. China now starts getting resources from the Central Asians. As China starts getting resources from Central Asia now, with the border problem finally being solved, now one thing is very important. China said that as I am going to get the resource now from Central Asia, and as this resource will come to me, and this resource will also help me to increase my economic power, then I also have to protect this resource. China now said a very important thing. China said, if I am going to get resource from Central Asia, if that resource of Central Asia will help me to increase my economic power, in that scenario, I also have to make sure that I protect this resource from Central Asia. Now China said that what is the methodology by which I can protect the resource? China said that one methodology I can use is that I can basically offer security protection to the Central Asians. Security protection means that I can offer them an alliance. China said that one best way by which I can protect this resource of Central Asia is by offering them security protection or by offering them alliance. So China said that, am I right now in a position to offer this security protection to Central Asia? Am I in a position right now in 2001 to offer an alliance to Central Asia? China introspected, and China found that they have no capacity right now to offer security protection. China found that, see, I want to protect the resource, but unfortunately I am not in a position right now because I don't have the capacity to provide security protection or alliance to them for this. So China was witnessing a very classical dilemma in the international relations. And the dilemma was that you want to protect the resource, and the strategy to protect the resource is through alliance, but you have no capability to propose an alliance. So China said that if this is the scenario, then what I will do is something different. So China said, fine, if I cannot offer them security protection, I can at least enhance the security capabilities of Central Asia. China said a very simple thing. It said that if I cannot provide security protection to them, at least I can enhance their security capability. And how do I enhance their security capabilities? That China said that, what I will do is, I will sell them military products. And if I sell them military products, what will happen is that their capability to protect themselves will increase. And if their capability gradually to protect themselves will increase with the military products I will sell them, China said that in this scenario, Central Asia will become a military market for me. So China said that I cannot offer security protection to them. But what I can definitely do is that I can enhance their security capability. Best way to enhance their security capability is that I start selling them military products. I will start looking at Central Asia as a military market, where I will sell them military products to them. And if they keep on buying their military products from me gradually over a period of time, they will have capacity and capability to protect themselves. And considering that most of the equipment would be mine, I will be required to keep on servicing that equipment in the future. So I will remain a credible player at the security level. So China decided to do this. And in the year of 2001, China decided to rename the Shanghai Five now with the SCO. And now when Shanghai Five became the SCO, it was a very unique concept in the world for the first time, where Shanghai Cooperation Organization which emerged was surprisingly not an alliance, but Shanghai Cooperation Organization which emerged, or the SCO which emerged, was a classical example where China at one place basically got resource from Central Asia. And on the other hand, China began to sell military products to Central Asia. So there is a two-way trade that began to happen. That one way China began to purchase resources. On the other side, China began to sell military products to enhance the capabilities and capacities of Central Asia. With the resource that China began to get from Central Asia, China was now in a position to basically increase its economic power. So as China was able to now increase their economic power from Central Asia now became a new priority area with a new instrument internationally China created called SCO. So SCO was one of the first manifestations of the Chinese in the Central Asian side. As this began to rise, by 2004-5, China basically now became more resource hungry. And the reason why China became resource hungry was because it was increasing its economic power drastically. And as it was increasing its economic power drastically and it became more resource hungry, 2004-5, China again as part of their outward strategy now announced two new areas to get this resource. So China as part of their outward strategy 2004-5 now said, firstly we will go to West Asia for the purpose of oil. We will also go to Africa for the purpose of resource. So China said we will go to West Asia for oil, Africa for resource. For the first time as part of their outward strategy, what we observe is that China identified two areas, West Asia and Africa, which were number one, not in the geographical proximity of China. If you see very carefully till now, China was focusing on their immediate neighborhood. The immediate neighborhood on the left is Central Asia and on the right is basically Southeast Asia. China till now was primarily focusing more on the land neighbors. But in 2004-5, for the first time, they announced a decision to go beyond their land neighbors. They announced a decision to go to a country like, or a territory like West Asia and a territory like Africa. And China realized that if the only way to reach out to West Asia and Africa is basically through the sea, then we will do that. And we will go through the sea to access these areas of West Asia and Africa. So China said that if I have to go through the sea, the only sea available through which I go there is called the Indian Ocean. So China said that if Indian Ocean is going to be used by me to reach out to West Asia and Africa, then we will use the Indian Ocean and reach out to West Asia and Africa. So China basically from 2004-5 began to undertake massive commercial activity in the Indian Ocean. China began to undertake massive commercial activity in the Indian Ocean. This was the first ever time when we began to see rising commercial activities of China in the waters that were very proximate to India in the Indian Ocean. Just as a side point for your knowledge, which we will not be elaborating because we will discuss that with the other teacher here. But when China wanted to go to West Asia, the West Asian countries are Muslim countries. China had never interacted with them. China never knew how to interact with them. So this is the time period when China decided that if I have to go to West Asia, I need a launch pad. And the launch pad was basically Pakistan for the Chinese. So China-Pakistan relation has been going on since 1972. But the fact is that China-Pakistan relation began to deepen post 2004-5. How Pakistan acted as a launch pad for China to West Asia is not for us to discuss. That is what you study under India-China relations. When you study China exclusively. So remember that as a point. So China now decided to undertake commercial activities in the Indian Ocean. As their commercial activities in the Indian Ocean began to rise, China at the same time also began to now increase their commercial activities in Southeast and East Asia. So China now, when it began to increase their commercial activity in Southeast and East Asia, this was the area where China began to engage through the Pacific Ocean. So So what we are witnessing is that basically since 2004-5, at one place China is engaging commercially with West Asia and Africa. On the other place we see China commercially engaging with Southeast and East Asia. That means that China is basically trying to emerge here basically as a commercial maritime power all the way from Indian Ocean to that of the Pacific Ocean. So what we observe here is that China rising and increasingly trying to become a commercial maritime power in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. China now said that if my commercial activities in Pacific and Indian Ocean are rising, then I also have to protect my commercial interests. So now China came out with a new concept. China said if my commercial activities are rising all the way in Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, I also have to protect my commercial interests in the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. So China now from basically 2005 to 2008 onwards basically began to undertake a new activity. China with its interest now and with an objective to protect its commercial interests in Indian and Pacific Ocean now basically began to deploy its naval power in the Indian Ocean and also began to deploy their naval power in the Pacific Ocean. So basically 2005 to 2008 what we observe is that at one place China is increasing its economic power. China is increasing its commerce in Indian Ocean plus Pacific Ocean, and China is also deploying or increasing its naval presence in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So 2005 and 8 time period is such where Chinese commercial activities, Chinese naval presence and Chinese economic power, collectively everything is rising here, and over a period of time we are observing China is becoming a formidable commercial and naval power here in the waters. And as China does this basically upsets many countries like India, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Australia, etc. All these countries which were there in the periphery of China, they began to become quite upset with this kind of activity done by China in their waters, commercially and navally. India began to complain that China is undertaking backyard politics. So India's grievance was that China is basically undertaking backyard politics in the area which is basically my backyard. And China, which is playing in my backyard, that area is basically the Indian Ocean. So India's grievance was neither economical nor military, but more of an ideological grievance, where India said that, Indian Ocean is my backyard. And why is China trying to undertake backyard politics or undertake deeper engagement in the area which is my backyard? But while we had a grievance like this, Japan, South Korea, and also Australia, these three people began to feel that China is basically acting as an economic threat to them. It is very natural to understand that why for Japan, South Korea and Australia, China was an economic threat. Because after all, Japan, South Korea and Australia already were powerful economies. As Japan, South Korea and Australia were already powerful economies, if China starts increasing its economic power, drastically increases its economic power in a short term, obviously they will perceive China as an economic threat. Similarly, with respect to Vietnam, Vietnam is basically an emerging economy. And not only an emerging economy, but let's not forget, Vietnam and China are land neighbors of each other. So obviously, Vietnam, China, which are land neighbors, plus Vietnam, which is an emerging economy, will perceive a rising economic power of China in front of them also as an economic threat. So one thing is very clear, that all these countries had a set of their own grievances. With these grievances in mind, these countries now decided to do something. And sometime in 2010-11, these countries approached US for assistance and help. And in 2010-11, when these countries approached US for help, they spoke to US about what was happening. They conveyed to US their grievances that they all had. US tried to study what was happening here. And when US studied what was happening here, US at that time studied and said that what is happening here is called a phenomenon known as rising China. USA coined this term, a rising China, which became one of the most influential terms in the post-Cold War period today. Something which the Americans always tried to use during the Cold War in the form of containment of Russia. Now it was replaced by something known as rising China today. So when they said there is a rising China, USA said that this rising China is an economically and militarily powerful China. And USA said that this economically, militarily powerful China is basically acting as a threat to my friends and allies in Asia. USA said that this rising China is acting as a threat to my friends and allies in Asia, my friends like India, Vietnam, my allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, etc. So USA said that this rising China is acting as a threat to my friends and allies in Asia. And it is acting as a threat to my friends and allies in Asia because my friends and allies here lack capacity to tackle this rising China. My friends and allies here lack the capacity to tackle this rising China. So USA said that because my friends and allies are worried, plus they are threatened because of the lack of capacity, so therefore we will do something. So sometime in 2010-11 again, the US announced a program. That program that they announced is called the Asian Rebalancing Initiative. And this Asian Rebalancing Initiative is also called as the Pivot to Asia program. It's a two-step program. So USA announces something known as the Asian Rebalancing Initiative, which is also known as the Pivot to Asia. Under this program, there are two steps that the Americans decided to do. First thing that the Americans they said under this program was that US said that we will enhance economic, strategic, military capacity of our friends and allies. USA said that what we are going to do firstly is that we will enhance the economic, strategic, military capacities of our friends and allies. Because just now, sometime back, we saw that USA was of this opinion that the friends and allies of US lack the capacity to tackle a rising China. So USA said that it is my responsibility, it is my duty to assist my friends and allies by giving them economic, strategic, military capacities. If you look at the capacity building exercise done by US for India, and you study India-US relations. So we are not studying that, but just making a passing reference here. That all those things that we observe in the present times between India and US, for example, the functional military relationship, it comes under pivot to Asia. Not only the functional military relationship, but also cooperation in Indo-Pacific, also the cooperation at the level of Quad. All these things today, whether the functional military relationship is seen, whether Indo-Pacific is seen, whether Quad is seen, or whether the future where they are negotiating something called as a trade deal, which may come up very soon between the two countries, will be seen. All of these dimensions today are a part of the larger pivot to Asia. So under pivot to Asia, what US is trying to do is that they are gradually trying to enhance economic, military, strategic capacity. Today, USA itself says that even the Indo-US nuclear deal we gave to you, that Indo-US nuclear deal should also be seen as an attempt to enhance the India's strategic capabilities. So one thing is very clear, that the step number 1 here of the pivot to Asia, this capacity enhancement, is basically an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process which will continue for many years and decades to come in the future. So pivot to Asia today is what it is, an umbrella program under which we see multiple dimensions of Indo-US relationship. And just like Indo-US relationship, same way. For that matter, don't forget, US is also doing the same today to Japan, also doing the same to South Korea, same to, for that matter, Singapore, also the same to, for that matter, Australia. But all these 4 countries and what US is doing to them will not come in GS, but they have to be studied by political science optional people in detail. So we don't need to go into all that, but just remember that pivot to Asia is not just for India, but it's for everybody here, all the friends and allies. So with India, whatever we are doing, you will study that with the other teacher communities in India-US relations. They come under that. But with respect to other places, the same thing is happening. It's an ongoing process. So USA says that while we continue to do this, secondly, the friends and allies also should try to bilaterally improve ties with each other. So USA also says simultaneously that while we are giving you people capacities, while we will continue to give you people capacities, all you people, the friends and allies, should also collectively, bilaterally come together and improve your ties with each other. So USA is trying to say that today, these countries which are basically in and around China, countries like India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, they should all improve relations amongst each other also. So India, Japan should come closer to each other. India, Australia should come closer. Japan, Australia. Japan, South Korea, Australia, South Korea, India. So USA says all of you should collectively also bilaterally improve ties with each other. Because USA says that if you bilaterally improve your ties with each other, what will happen is, collectively all of you will be able to keep a check on rising China. Collectively, all of you will also be able to keep a check upon the rising China. So one thing is very clear, that today at the systemic level, if India, Japan are coming closer, they are coming closer because of pivot to Asia. At the systemic level, if India, South Korea are coming closer, they are coming closer because of pivot to Asia. Systemic level, India, Australia also are coming closer, pivot to Asia is bringing them closer. In political science optional, you also study how Japan, South Korea, Australia, Japan, Vietnam, Australia, like this. All of them are also at the systemic level coming closer. We don't need to go into all that. Our concern is with respect to Japan. That with respect to Japan, if India, Japan at the systemic level are coming closer today, then they are coming closer because of pivot to Asia. Similarly, if this is at the systemic level, then we observe the same thing at the individual level here. At the individual level, the leaders of India and Japan Japan today, they have identified two areas of cooperation. Firstly, the leaders of India, Japan today have identified and created something called an arc of freedom. The word freedom here is very important because the word freedom here means an association of democracy. So India and Japan, the leaders have identified something called arc of freedom, which is an association of democracy. Time and again, whenever India and Japan interact, they interact and emphasize that India and Japan have an interaction at the level of democracy. By deliberately emphasizing the word upon democracy, India and Japan are ideologically able to counter China. Because China is not a democracy. By deliberately emphasizing that it's an association of democracy bringing the two states closer, India and Japan are able to ideologically contain China here by saying something like this. Similarly, the leaders of the two countries have also announced a very important concept called the Annual Prime Minister Summit. Under the Annual Prime Minister Summit, the Prime Ministers of the two states interact. When they interact, they set an agenda. When they set an agenda, they use that agenda for the next 1 year. Then 1 year later, the leaders of the two states are able to again take stock of whatever projects they had announced previously and see the implementation this way. So Annual Prime Minister Summit, plus at the same time, Arc of Freedom or an association of democracy time and again announced, helps India Japan even at the individual level to come closer. Similarly, related to this, as a part of your homework, you have to see two important things on the page number 575 to 580. First is something called the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. The Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is one of the projects that was announced between India and Japan in the Annual Prime Minister Summit 2017. Asia-Africa Growth Corridor has certain principles. A question in the prelims that what are the principles of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and how are they different from the principles of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative? A comparative question of that nature in the prelims is highly possible. So have a reading about the principles given here. And number two, the Malabar exercise. This is a very important thing between India and Japan which happens along with US. And try to understand here that why India does not want Australia to be a part of Malabar. There are reasons why India does not like Australia being added as a part of Malabar. So as of now, the Malabar exercise remains a defense exercise between India, Japan and US only. What do India, Japan, US do here? And what is the reluctance of India to add Australia there? These are two things that you should be knowing. So keep that in mind. Okay? Now give the heading domestic level and write down few lines. At the domestic level, Japan provides ODA to India which gets invested in multiple infrastructure projects in India that range from high-speed rail corridors to that of smart city development, manufacturing centers, and cooperation in river cleaning. In the recent times, as per various studies, Japan by 2050 is likely to witness economic stagnation. This is primarily because Japan is having a rising aging population. To mitigate this problem, the government of Japan is trying to open up its immigration sector and has been providing the banks with additional cash to encourage skilled professionals from different parts of the world to settle down in Japan. People from India are working with Japan under the easy immigration policy. In sectors like IT, nursing care and fish packaging. Therefore, at the domestic level, India and Japan are coming closer because of ODA and easy immigration policy. Any issue anywhere in Japan? Any question, clarification, doubt anywhere? Karim, Belt and Road Initiative. Any other issue? So please take out the handout that we had earlier, the answer writing handout. Open the question number 3 there. The third question relates to the question of Africa. So in this question, be very careful, as we saw earlier also, that the answer to this question primarily is about the 5 phases between India and Africa. The space given here for this question is of 150 words. And in a 150-word question which is there, you don't have the flexibility to draw diagrams. And you also don't have the flexibility in a 150-word answer to use bullet points. That means everything has to be put in a concrete single paragraph. As far as the body of this answer is concerned, where you happen to discuss the 5 phases, be very careful that while discussing those 5 phases, you put the essence or the idea of them in a single paragraph rather than using any bullet points, because there is no such space possibility for that. And as I told you, the conclusion is always a positive futuristic suggestion. So basically, take the next 6 minutes and try to conclude this answer fast. try to write it on the basis of the knowledge that you have. And after you write it in the next 6 minutes, then we will randomly pick up 5 people. We will invite them here on the stage. They can share their answers with us. And every of your brain will get to know that how dedicated you are in your preparation in the month of October. So that way, it will be a good activity for your brains also to know how serious you are. So take the next 6 minutes and write it fast. And write the answer with whatever knowledge you have in your mind, sir. कॉपी खोल के पन्ने पलट के जिसने देखा और मेरे को कोई को दिख गया करते हुए उसका नंबर पहले आएगा. आंसर अपनी नॉलेज से लिखना है आपने. अपने बगल वाले का आंसर भी नहीं देखना. बगल वाला आपके जितना निकलना है उसको देखने से कुछ नहीं होगा. टाइम कम है सर, 6 मिनट है. आपकी इज्जत आपके हाथ में है. जल्दी लिखिए. हो गया? वो आया नहीं था? कहाँ था? हो गया? तुम गाँव ही जा. पैसे कराओ आप. Last 1 minute, right fast. So please stop writing. Please wherever you are, don't worry about it. How many of you were able to complete the answer? Please raise your hands. Very few of you, no problem. How many of you were at the body part of the answer? Majority of you. And how many of you were only at the introduction? If any, don't worry, raise your hand. Nothing to get worried about. Well, okay, quite a few. You see, first and foremost thing is that as we had already told you earlier that this is the question you will write. You can always have the liberty of preparing in advance and come. And then obviously, if you have the points readily available in your mind, you can easily write the answer. You know, compare and contrast this situation now in the exam, where you come across a question which is not known to you. And you have precisely 6.5 minutes to not only think about the answer, but also in the same time write the answer. That is why everything boils down to one simple word, that is memorization and revision. You know, take this word from me forever, that whether you become an IAS this year or maybe a decade later, whenever, you will realize that year and the day which you will reach Mussoorie and the day you will become an IAS officer will only depend upon the amount of memorization and revision you do. The people who are able to memorize, they have the entire content readily there in their mind. They were able to just vomit it out. Whether you like it or not, you know, honestly speaking, you will realize it one day. This exam does not require anything but memorization. It's a test of your memory rather than anything else. It's very stupid, but that's the reality. That they just try to test that how much information are you able to retain and how much are you able to write in the stipulated time. You know, as I told you earlier, there is nothing called answer writing unless you don't have the content in your brain. The content can only come by repeated memorization and revision. So, firstly, the ones who were able to complete the answer were able to do that because they had the content readily available in their mind. They saw the question, they didn't have to think much, they knew the content, they vomited it out. The ones who were at the body, they also had the content, but they have to now understand one thing, they have to pace up at the level of, you know, the collection of the information. The ones who were only at the introduction, don't worry about it, please take this answer as a learning for today. That the reason why you were only at the introduction is because you were not having the points. See, I told you this question is what we will write today. Even today, I will tell you what question we will write again in the next class. In every class, one class prior, I will tell you the question. The idea of telling you the question in advance is that you have the liberty to prepare. And the idea of telling you the question also in advance is to make sure that you write down in the stipulated word limit within the stipulated time. So please make sure at the same time that unless or until you don't memorize and revise repeatedly again and again, things will be very tough for you. You will never have the confidence. You are already in the month of November now. October is finished. And unless or until deep memorization and revision of each subject is not done, sir, you will have a lot of difficulty. You never become an IAS with what you have in your notes, but what you have from your notes in your brain. After the prelims, when you come back home, that day in the evening, you will sit down with the paper and you will find everything was somewhere here or there. In some booklet, some notes, somewhere here or there. But you qualify or fail based upon what you were able to keep and take there in the exam in your brain. So please remember one word, memorization and revision is the key. And at least many of you were able to write. I'm sure many of you also did not bother to write this answer, they were just sitting and relaxing here. Anyway, those people will never pass the prelims for the next 10 years also. We are not concerned about them. They are anyway not a part of this competition. They are just here to sustain this market. It's a separate issue for them. But at least for for the majority of the chunk who were able to do artwork. Let us try to have a look at what this question had to consist of. As far as introduction is concerned, your answer will basically begin with the historical Satyagraha. You can also use the word Gandhi's presence in Africa instead of Satyagraha. You also have the presence of using a common colonial past. Or for that matter, you can also say that India and Africa basically had a historical linkage. You have a lot of freedom to use either of the word here, based upon whatever your choice is. Secondly, you have to tell the examiner in the introduction that your Indo-Africa tries gradually transform to development diplomacy, and finally towards the energy security. These three words capture the essence of the entire answer. How many of you were able to have all the 3 points in the introduction? Quite a lot of you. And how many of you were able to have 2 out of these 3? Majority of you. Any one of you having only 1 out of these 3? 1 only. Quite a few of you. Please remember, as I told you earlier also, an introduction is the summary of the answer. And trust me, the introduction is the most difficult part to define in an answer. If your answer introduction begins only with the point of Gandhi and Satyagraha or that historical legacy, you will indirectly try to communicate to the examiner that, see, my answer will be purely on the historical point, which you cannot afford to do, because this question demands from the historical point till today. So that capturing of the essence is the key. I will give you one suggestion now. Keep that in mind, at least for the answer subsequently that we will practice here. Here, because I have given you separate space for introduction, body and conclusion. Every time, next time, whenever we write the answers in the class, focus on first writing the body and then write the introduction later. Because when you happen to write the body, you get the content there. From there, you can easily pick up points, 2 to 3 points, which you may not miss to design the introduction. So try to do it reverse next time. First write the body and then try to write the introduction towards the end of the answer. So that at least you will be able to capture the essence. And the essence here is all the 3 words. You see, for the first point here, you have the flexibility to use any of this. But for the second and the third point, there is no flexibility. These words have to be there. There is no replacement for these words also. If these words are not written there in the answer, then the examiner will not get the impression of the complete knowledge that you possess about it. Similarly, when we go to the body part of this answer here, in the body part, your answer obviously begins with the 2-point policy of India. Even if you have not written the word 2-point policy, and if you have mentioned that India decided to support decolonization in Africa and promoted non-alignment, that is also right. Gradually, from there you proceed to saying that Africans drifted away to China. They drifted to China primarily because of discrepancy in the foreign policy of India and the impatience with the strategy of Satyagraha. And as a result of which, they drifted towards China. Then after the point of China, you will say that Africans, when they got decolonized by 1970s, India basically was one of the role models. And India also, which was one of the role models at the developmental level, now used non-alignment or NAM by giving it an economic character and decided to reach out to the Africans for help. How many of you mentioned all these 3 points here? Quite a lot of you. How many of you mentioned only 2 out of the 3? Again, I am sure that the ones who have mentioned 2 only might have missed the point of NAM as an economic character. Or maybe China as a point here. The role model of India. You see, please remember one thing. We have discussed those 5 phases. Those 5 phases are all coherent with each other. Because if you say, for example, Miss India as a role model, then how do you justify in the 4th phase that India's relation is at the development diplomacy? That will be very difficult for you to justify. Because India became a role model at the developmental level, the relation became next step is this. If you miss something like this, you can't directly jump from China here. There is lack of coherence in your answer again. Something will be missing. But I am sure some of you might have done this error also, that when you were talking from China to India as a role model, some of you must have talked about that there was US as a role model, USSR as an option, and China as an option. Did any one of you mention about these 3? US, USSR and all? Very few of you. But please remember, it is not wrong of mentioning these 3 things here. But it is wrong in this answer, which is of 150 words. At this question of 250 words, this debate is required. That US has to be US was a role model, Russia was a role model, China was a role model and all. But considering it's a 150 word answer, directly you jump here. That Africans became independent through a mixture of the Chinese and Indian strategy. They started searching for a role model. India positioned itself as an appropriate developmental role model because of the green revolution and industrial base creation. And as a result of which India was able to use non-alignment by giving it an economic character reached out to the Africans. Relation now became at the development diplomacy level. From there it migrated and successfully energized to the energy security level today. While talking about the energy security, how many of you here basically mentioned that piece of data that we saw that in 2019-20 government says that 20% of the oil we use in India today comes from Africa? Did any one of you use this data? Very few of you. Please remember, this is an important point you missed again. You know, in the introduction of your answer, you were using the word energy security. How do you justify that now in the body? Any justification to a point of the introduction can be done in the body through two ways. That either you put up a government scheme or a government policy to justify. Do we have a government scheme for oil? Answer is no. If you have no government scheme or government policy, the second way to offer justification is through government data. And government data is the authentic data. Don't create your own data. Sometimes people happen to do that also. कुछ नहीं आता अपना डेटा डालो. भाई साहब वो एग्जामिनर वहाँ पे वो कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट का वो लड़का नहीं है जो आपका आंसर चेक कर रहा है. वो लड़के तो वही है जो चेक कर रहे हैं आपके टेस्ट सीरीज के आंसर जो 2 बार मेंस में फेल हो चुके हैं. वहाँ पे यूपीएससी का एग्जामिनर चेक कर रहा है. मजाक तो मत लेना उसको. जीवन मजाक बना देगा. Use data which is authentic, which has been disclosed by the government publicly, either in the economic survey or in the India Yearbook. India Yearbook is a useless source. They don't update it. Economic survey is the major source. And if you have taken the effort of memorizing that data, only then use it. So this is one of the points you will use to justify it. And similarly, once you do this, when it comes to the conclusion, positive futuristic suggestion, one point you can use is African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Did any one of you use the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in the conclusion? One, very good. This is one of the very important points. I told you earlier in the previous class also when we discussed Africa to read this. African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which happened in June this year, has the potential to transform Indo-Africa commercial relations. In each sector of India's relation with Africa, there is going to be a transformation because of the CFTA. You have to capture that every aspect here and put it in front of the examiner in the conclusion. Similarly, connectivity is one of the areas where we need to work very aggressively with the Africans. Did any one of you mention connectivity as a point in the conclusion? Again, good, very few of you. And you know, not only connectivity here when you mention, you have to remember one thing, as your knowledge of IR will grow over a period of time, and as you will develop the ability to interlink information with your revisions, you will understand one thing. Try to recollect something we talked about in the previous class, Act East policy. You remember under Act East policy there is a point called connectivity, where we said IMT highway. This is what you will draw as an analogy in your answer here. You will say that just like India under the Act East policy prioritized connectivity with Southeast and East Asia, is something which is the need of the hour for Africa. So by drawing an analogy like this, you are able to communicate to the examiner that you have in-depth knowledge. You are able to communicate to the examiner that see, we have officially done something here which we officially lack here. So that is one very important comparison you need to draw. This is how you gain one extra mark in every paper, sir. Because this one half extra mark in every answer that you will get by drawing your answers in a more analytical manner is only going to make a huge difference overall. Similarly, you always have the flexibility to talk about other things. For example, something we have discussed today, which I have told you to read again as a part of your homework, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. That Asia-Africa Growth Corridor can be one of the very important future areas of Indo-Africa relations, which not only you can use here, but also in the Indo-Japan answers. Because in the India-Japan, you will write it there as a 2+1 format. But in case of India-Africa answers, it will be directly Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, pooling of the resources of India-Japan for the larger development of Africa. Plus, you will give certain principles of the corridor there. Similarly, you can always talk about energy security. Even 25% of the oil government says by 2025 will come from Africa. That point can be freely used, no problem in that. We have seen this point earlier. Similarly, you can also say at the same time, Indian diaspora in Central Africa. You can also say reaching out to the Francophone part of Africa. So you have a lot of points in the conclusion to play with. There is a lot of flexibility. But considering it's a 150 word answer, 2 points max in the conclusion. So we have discussed many, but you are free to use any of them. But preferably use the ones which are currently in the news. See, these points like energy security, Indian diaspora, francophone, these are static things. If you add current things like the Continental Free Trade Agreement, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, you will get more marks. So try to understand one thing. Answers are not easy to write, sir. They require a lot of churning of information in your brain. And they require at the end of the day memorization and review. So please read the question number 2 here first in the item. The question number 2 relates to the information we discussed in the class number 1. Non-alignment question. So that is the question we shall be writing in the next class. So come prepared with this. And the ones who were at the body part of the answer today, try to make sure in 6 minutes conclude the answer. The ones who were able to complete the answer today, try to make sure that in the next class, you conclude the answer in 5 minutes and not 6 minutes. Now you try to increase your speed. So that one extra minute you save here, you can devote to other answers where you may require some thinking capability. The one who were at the introduction today, remember, you have to focus upon increasing the speed and memorization in review. One who did not write anything in the class today, it's better you stop coming only from the next class. You sit at home, you are not even a part of the race for this exam. So don't waste your time and effort coming here all the way. It's better you sit at home. Okay, anyways, question number 2. We'll write that in the next class and we'll continue from it in the next class How can you